what aloha really means? It means the same as I behold the Christ in you, the God in you, the Godness in you. It is talking about the presence of ha, which is the Hawaiian name for breath, for life. And it's wonderful to see some of the people here. I get a bit teary. But this morning, the title of my talk is Getting to Know the Idea of Sacrifice. Now, because we're together in this format, I'm not going to ask for you to tell me, but I suspect that many of you do know that the word sacrifice actually comes from Latin, as many things do in our language, and it means to make holy, to make sacred, to make holy. Now, one of the things that we've learned over the years of looking at dictionaries and looking at Greek and Latin roots, which is something that fascinates me, is that the word holy, the word health and healing all mean the same thing. They come from Anglo-Saxon, those words. And that Anglo-Saxon set of words, health, healing, holiness, come from looking at a Latin word, sane. We've heard about sanity and insanity. And sane is the Latin word for health. So if you see it written in some of the things that I enjoy, it talks about our insanity. It's when we see ourselves not healthy, whole, and complete. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm telling you right here up, I do not see myself all the time as totally complete. So it's a human condition that we may not see ourselves that way. One of the things I want to share with you a bit about is that the Bible as we know it was a series of writings and stuff put together in 375 AD, or Common Era, however you want to put it, that was put together by the Roman Empire. And they had a definite purpose for doing that. One of the things that had been happening was 375 years. Can any of you know really that what you think people said in 1700 is something that they could really be reported very accurately? Yes, it could be printed by then. But something that happened 375 years ago, having been talked about by a lot of different people, is going to mean something very different when we come to the crunch, isn't it? And what had been happening was a couple of different things. The early followers of Yeshua ben Joseph, alias Jesus, were called followers on the way. And they spread in different little groups in different ways and what have you, after the life and death of Jesus, who was a real man, and said a few things. And the big thing is he taught by example. But the followers of the way were following the example of Jesus in the early days. And they spread around the place, and a lot of them ended up in close proximity to the Romans, who were, at that stage, had overtaken the world, as it was known. And originally the word Christian, I think this is cute, the word Christian was originally a pejorative expression, talking about these crazy Jewish misfits who were running around with funny beliefs. So that's rather interesting to point out, finger at ourselves. But those earliest followers of the way over the years, and please get it that none of the Bible as we know it, as was put together by the Roman Empire, was written before about 70 AD. Perhaps Paul's letters, and some of them may have been written by Paul, were earlier than that. But the Gospels, as we know it, the first one that we know of, was written around 70 years after. Now, I had a bit of a joke with the people yesterday because I can remember some things that happened 70 years ago. Most of you can't, some of you can. But one of the things that happened some years ago is the anniversary today that I personally have very deeply in my heart, and it's the assassination of John Kennedy, 22nd of November. And I think those of us who were on the planet and conscious can remember exactly where we were at the time when we learnt of that. I had my left hand on a refrigerator in a kitchen in Canberra that I was just about to open the door. And the refrigerator was grey, it had been painted grey. And I could see the actual marks that were there as my hand touched that door, as the radio told me of Jack Kennedy's assassination. But that was many years ago. And the people who've come after us don't know what it actually felt like at that moment. So can you imagine that the people who are trying to talk about the experience of Jesus 70 years later don't really know? They don't know what it felt like, what it was really like. Anyway, these people who were Jewish were trying to prove something that they had been wanting to believe for many, many years, was that there would be a Messiah who would come and take them into safety and comfort out of the Roman Empire, and before that the Greek. But they were looking for a saviour, someone to save them from being dominated by the power of some outside force. Anyone know what that feels like? So they were trying to make it that Jesus, Yeshua, ben Joseph, fitted in with the messianic prophecies. So that the time the Roman Empire starts to put the Bible together, God bless them, they've got this whole thing that's been built up, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the messianic prophecy that says it's going to give them freedom. But Rome wanted to use it because they saw that this was very powerful. The Jews who'd been followers of the way had taken on some of the titles that they used for the Caesars of the Roman Empire. And there's books that prove it. All the titles that we have about Jesus as Lord and Saviour and this and that and what have you had actually been applied to the Roman empires from the time of Caesar Augustus. But they decided to blend it all together, and that would give them this only begotten Son, the one, that belonged to them as they tromped around Europe, marching through and taking over the lands that they were finding. They'd already got control of a lot of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, but they wanted more. And so when we get it, that a lot of things that we read in what we have now called the Bible were really put together by the Roman Empire. And to be honest, I always refer to it as the church that the Roman Empire invented. But the interesting thing is that with the putting together of this, we then come into the translations, and I'm not going to go on about it totally, but the King James Version was translated in Elizabethan English, and all of the scholars who put that together understood Latin. And there were lots and lots of words that are in it that in later updates of the Bible, they've used more contemporary words for what we think those words mean. And I can't go into that too much now, but trust me on this one. Lots of words that have come in later versions were not knowing the Latin roots of the words that are in the King James Version. And one very, very, very big thing is those of you who understand French and Italian and probably German, forgive me if I'm not sure, but you know that the second person singular is different from the second person plural, isn't it? Now, I've heard people over here saying, oh, isn't it lovely they cut out all of these and thous? Sorry, they've cut out the intimacy, because you is the second person plural. It's more out there, whereas thou and thee are very personal. And so the thing is that what we've been looking at in modern psychology and all sorts of areas is looking at the I-thou connection. And if we look at it, when we see the old versions, we see that there is a personal connection with the godness. Is that getting through? One of the things that they were looking at with early Judaism was healing the sense of separation from God. Now, Unity's definition of sin, and the people who've been in my class know what it is sin is a belief in a sense of separation from God. And what Jesus was really about, I believe, was saying, you're it. You don't have to have a God out there. You have a relationship, an I-thou relationship with God. One of the other things that they were doing as they went through this business of being followers of the way and trying to explain to people and being Jewish, they kept in the concept of the paschal lamb of the Passover and the scapegoat of Yom Kippur, because these are symbolic things of sacrifice that the Jewish community understood. They'd been saved because something had taken away their sins. And so they turned Jesus into that. And that's where we get the idea of Jesus sacrificing his life for your sins. And we've lived underneath that. And I don't care what religion we were brought up in. We've lived in a culture that has had us be declared as sinners and needing to be saved. Well, Jesus tells us how to do it. You've got to get that to be saved from your own stuff. We need to be able to see that we have this I-thou relationship with the God of our understanding. Now, the word God, of course, has got to be very dangerous and scary for a lot of people. I meet all sorts of people who are absolutely lovely and wonderful, and they say, oh, I cringe at the name of God, with the word God. Modern scientists have shown us that what was known by the mystics is that the God, as to the creator, the creationing, is an ongoing process. And science has given us the background to it with our understanding of, like, the Big Bang Theory and quantum physics, that is showing us that what the mystics have told us for years, centuries, millennia, is true. That there is only one presence and one power, and it's energy, it's power, it's the life force. Paul Tillich calls it the ground of being. The ground of being. All that is. We've heard all that is, haven't we? We've heard isness. And we are living in a time where that concept is physiologically, scientifically provable. So we are living in probably the best time ever. One of the things that is in the teachings is that we have a covenant with the ground of our being. George Bernard Shaw called it the life force in Man and Superman. The life force, the ground of being, the isness. And we have a covenant with it, not a bargain. How many times have we been taught to bargain with God? You're allowed to laugh, please. When you think about it, it's ridiculous. Now, if I pray right, if I do this right, if I'm a good girl, or I'm a good boy, or I don't do this, or I do this, or blah, 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 maybe God will love me. Maybe. The thing is, God is love. God is creativity. God is creation. God is where? everywhere, equally and evenly present. This whole universe is one energy. Look at the birds. Oh, I sound like Jesus. So it's about not bargaining with God. It's about looking at the truth of the covenant. Because as you are, so God is. As you believe God is, so God is. Right? You're the only authority. Yeah. I can't tell you. Nobody can tell you. Your Godness within you knows the truth of who you are and what your covenant is with God. So we're going to look at that. One of the things is, Jesus was on about, it wasn't about justice, it was about cause and effect. So if we look at the cause of us, which is universal creativity, we can see an effect by how our lives are, what's in front of us, what our perception is. What we see is what we created with our amazing imagination. We see the effect of what's out there in other people and the situation when we have a choice about whether we're going to judge it part of creation or not. And if we judge it bad, we're talking about the effect. We can talk about the behaviour. I mean, I do some bad behaviour. Anybody here doesn't? Oh, you don't do any bad behaviour, Rob. I do behaviour that you might think is bad. You do behaviour I might think is bad. But the behaviour is not who you are. Some of you know I spent many years being a practising drunk in my alcoholism. And if you'd known me then and seen me in some of those situations, you might have gone, oh, goodness, what's she up to? But it wasn't who I am. And I'm not who I am totally today. There's more. It's limitless possibilities of expressing my inner being. But the thing is that the cause of each person is an evolving thing, part of the universal creativity. Does that make sense? This means yes, that means no. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Now, one of the things is we want to look at the word, I want to look at the word, because I've got the cards here. I want to look at the word compassion. Jesus showed a way and demonstrated a way of compassion. In this book, oh, by the way, I'm plugging a couple of books, but Saving Jesus from the Church by Robin Myers is one of the best, is probably the best book I have ever read. It is wonderful. It's in paperback, you can get it from Book Depository. It's terrific. He quotes Marcus Borg, he quotes John Shelby Spong, he quotes a lot of the modern Bible scholars that many of us really, really enjoy. And he, on page 126, he says something about the unbridled compassion. Don't you love that? A compassionate God is one who models compassion for us, and not the same thing as a God who may extend or may not extend mercy. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But he talks about unbridled compassion. Now, many of us bridle our compassion. We'll have compassion for some people and not for others, right? But Jesus is showing us a way of unbridled compassion because he included everybody, and everybody in that world that was around at the time is included in his caring. He says on page 129, unbridled, okay, what Robin Myers said, this unbridled compassion, which is never an abstraction but always a way of being in the world, would later be spoken of in the New Testament as love. Now, Leslie's teaching this wonderful little book put out by Jared Jan Polsky called Love is Letting Go of Fear, which is a fabulous introduction to, of course, the miracles, which is a whole other ball game, which is something where we can also get a closer connection with this one presence and one power. And love or fear is what is ruling us. Fear is always about the other person or other things going to get us. No. Love is saying, wow, that other person or experience or what have you is a part of my understanding of creationing. And if we can use everyone and every situation for seeing it part of ourselves as part of the creationing, it makes it a wholly other thing, doesn't it? It makes it holy. There's a beautiful quote here that when Jesus makes it clear that the criteria for judgment will be ethical and not theological, he says, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family," it's interesting the daily words about family, "you did it to me." And that's in Matthew. He's asking his disciples to transpose their love for him into everybody they meet, as if they were encountering him over and over again. And then later on the page, it quotes from Leviticus, which contain the purity laws. You know, the purity laws are very big in the whole thing of the time about you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. There were 300 and something laws about what you could or couldn't eat and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, in Leviticus it says, it's grounded on the imperative. "Speak to all of the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Now that's back in Leviticus. So it's nothing new that we're talking about. The thing that's interesting is one of the earliest quotes about it is, one of the earliest and probably most authentic utterances of Jesus is, "Be compassionate as God is compassionate." It's in Luke. This was his way to imitate God. Unfortunately, Matthew uses the word perfect, which makes faith an impossible ideal. And in many English translations, the word is merciful, which has a very different connotation. In Hebrew as well as Aramaic, the word usually translated as compassion is the plural of a noun, which in its singular form means womb. As a woman feels compassion for the child in her womb, so compassion, passion from the Latin word meaning to feel, and the prefix com, with, that's to feel with, is a quality of vicarious, even visceral, empathy. This happens at a level beneath the brain. In biblical terms, for a man in the bowels, for a woman in the womb. In other words, deep within. Now, one of the things that I said to my son Julian recently when he was going through some anguish in his own life, and I said to him, "Darling, I know that as your mother, you know, I just want the best for you. I know as your mother, I feel that I want to alleviate your pain. I want to give you comfort. I want to give you strength." And I said, if I, as a human mother, can be like that, how much more can the infinite mothering love of God want for you? He got it. He got it for a moment. Does he hang on to it every moment? Do any of us hang on to it every moment? No. But he got it. And I want you to get it. That love of God, the ground of your being, loves you with an everlasting, unchanging love. Now, who is the person? Jesus said, "Judge not that you be not judged," right? We've all heard that. That's the most important thing out. Difference between judgment and discernment. We can go into that. But who's the person that you judge the most? You may all put your hands up. Don't we sit around waiting to condemn ourselves? You did something wrong. You didn't do that perfectly. Who did everything perfectly yesterday? Sit on your hands. Except that we did. We did everything. Having been made through exactly the experience we were supposed to be having for our unfoldment. We're not here to please anybody else. If we could only get that, we'd all be happy, joyous and free. We're here to please ourselves by expressing and feeling and experiencing that godness in us. I'm begging you to give yourself every opportunity you possibly can to appreciate, to accept, to look at, to be awake about every single thing about yourself and every single thing that you do. The trick is to be aware. When we've got running family of origin and church stories about what we should do or shouldn't do, we are not really aware of what's going on. We've got this ego running around there saying, and you all hear your parents' voice or some minister's voice or someone in your head going a lot of the time? Or am I the only one on the planet? And no matter how far along we've gone in learning about this, I really do believe we still have that rabbiting going on a lot of the time. I'm asking you to be aware of the rabbiting that's going on and be aware of how you really feel. And be aware that the power of love is not only to be given to your neighbour, but it is to be given as yourself. And when we are in that state of compassion with ourselves, we are much, much more ready to be of use on the planet. And I rest my case. Thank you. Now, okay, you may.